Hey everybody, and welcome back to Frontend Expert. In this video, we will be discussing stacking contexts and going into how exactly z-index is actually working. So here in this HTML, we first have a section and it contains two divs, red and blue, and those are the red and blue boxes in the output. And then outside of the section, we have one more div, and that has the ID of green, and this is the green box in the output. So let's take a look at the CSS file for this. So each of these divs is set to position fixed, and then there's some styles down here that are just making them easier for us to see. And then in each one, we are setting some properties. So for example, in green, we give it the background color of green. We set its top and left value, which is working again because it is position fixed. So this is just how far it is from the top and left of the browser window. And then we set the z-index. So right now, red has a z-index of 1, blue has a z-index of 2, and green has a z-index of 3. And this makes sense. If we look at the output, blue is visually on top of red, and green is visually on top of blue, which also makes it, of course, on top of red as well. And we could do something like change the red z-index to be 4, and now you'll see red is covering up green and blue. I'll put it back to 1, of course. But now let's look at what exactly is happening when we set these z-index values and we use position fixed. So anytime we add position fixed, it creates what we call a stacking context. And position fixed isn't the only way to create a stacking context. There are tons more. A few examples of them include position sticky also creates a stacking context. Position relative along with a z-index creates a stacking context. Transform properties create stacking contexts. And there are a ton more examples. So a stacking context is a grouping of elements on the z-axis. And in this case, each one of these is acting as its own stacking context because each one of these values, red, green, and blue, are all position fixed, which creates a stacking context for each one. And then the z-index says how high up in the z-axis is the stacking context. So right now, the green stacking context has a value of 3, the blue stacking context has a value of 2, and the red stacking context has a value of 1. And when each of the elements has its own stacking context, this is sort of what you expect. But what would happen if we went to the section and we created a stacking context here as well? So one of the ways we can do this is by setting it to position fixed. And then let's give it a z-index of 4, saying that this section is on top. And once this is saved, you'll see that green has been pushed all the way to the bottom. But green has a z-index of 3. Shouldn't it be on top of red and blue? What's happening here? Why is green below red and blue? Well, if we go back to the HTML, we can see that we have this section here, and then the green is outside of it. So this entire section is a stacking context because we made the section position fixed. And then this div with the ID green is also a stacking context, and we call these sibling stacking contexts because they are at the same level, not necessarily in the DOM tree, but they're at the same level within stacking contexts because they are both at the root level. They are the highest level stacking contexts we have other than just the base document stacking context. And this section has a z-index of 4, whereas the div of green has a z-index of 3. So what this means is that green is below the section, meaning that this green will be below everything inside of this section. And then red and blue, we aren't comparing them to green. We already know because they are in a higher stacking context parent that they are higher than green. The z-index of red and blue is only being used to compare them to each other within their stacking context parent. And because of that, we see that blue is on top of red. And of course, we can change that. So we could give blue maybe a -1 z-index. And you'll see now red is on top of blue. But even with a negative z-index, blue is still in front of green because blue's parent, the section, is a sibling stacking context to the green stacking context. And the section has a higher z-index than green does. But of course, if we made green's z-index higher than the z-index of the section, so we can make this 5, now green is ahead of red and blue. And regardless of what I do to red and blue, this can't change. So if I gave red a z-index of 1,000, it's still below green. And the reason for this is that red is inside of the section with a z-index of 4, which is lower than green. So no matter what we do to red, it's only comparing itself to blue. So changing the z-index of red is never going to put it on top of green. And the only way that red could ever be on top of green is if its parent stacking context, so the section, became higher than green. So again, we could change this to 6, and now red is back above green, as is blue, and these will always move as a unit. So if red is above green, so is blue, and likewise, if red is below green, blue is also below green. Now that'll do it for this video on stacking contexts. Again, there are a ton of ways to actually create a stacking context. So if you're running into any bugs related to z-index, most likely it's related to the fact that you either have more stacking contexts than you think you have, or you have less than you think you have because of some piece of code that is creating a new one. And with that, that's going to be the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.